Hello folks, welcome to the NWORX webinar. I'm Hariraj, co-founder and CEO at NWORX. Really happy to get started with this new series, Lessons from the New World of Work. My own background, previously I was the Chief Learning Officer at Cognizant, responsible for the continuous development of 200,000 plus professionals across 50 plus countries. For over 25 years, I've had experience across technology, business consulting, business management, learning, and leadership development. Now, NWORX enables individuals, managers, and leaders to achieve their leadership goals that in turn ensures organizational performance. It's a goal achievement platform that aspires to help millions of leaders to perform the right action at the right time. NWORX offers both mobile app and web browser-based software technology that helps professionals and managers plan, personalize, and navigate experiences of development as a leader while they are at work. Leadership in the flow of work is what we call it. Now, I'll hand it over to my co-founder, Shwetal Shubhadeep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shwetal. And like Hari mentioned, I co-founded NWORX with him. I'm a specialist in the field of leadership development, having facilitated managers and leaders for more than 20 years to enhance their leadership ability. This has included enabling CXO level leaders to lead transformation in their organizations, facilitating senior leaders to enhance collaboration to achieve ambitious goals or to create a high performance culture in their teams, enabling mid-level managers to exert greater influence on their stakeholders to achieve effectiveness, and supporting first-time managers to make the transition to becoming effective people leaders for the first time in their professional careers. At NWORX, I'm responsible for delivery and product operations, plus I lead the team of high-performance business coaches. At NWORX, we are driven to use leadership practices which are backed by research in the field to impact individuals who can transform the collectives they lead in. Our mission is to transform the collective while impacting the individuals. We are starting this webinar series because we see some significant shifts in leadership in the last 500 days that at least we have officially been in the pandemic. As we deploy the NWORX platform in our client organizations, we interact closely with business executives and managers at all levels. And for the past many months, we've been in deep discussions with our partners across the world too on matters of leadership and performance. And we realize that it's important to share what we have seen and what we have learned. Much has changed in the business world as we knew it. Leaders everywhere have had to adapt. And yes, the change has been unprecedented, but we have been curious. Has everything about leadership changed? Not really. There is another side to the change. We observe in our work that there is a subset of leaders who adopted specific principles and led very effectively during the crisis-like phase of the pandemic. And now, as we recover and as we are poised for the next phase of post-pandemic, they are also positioned to continue to lead effectively. And those are the perspectives that we're going to share in this webinar today.
Yeah. So I want to preface the kind of perspective we share. We want to share practice-backed information on those principles that we have observed. Many of the experts in our field offer scientific research-based information. Some offer survey and interview-based information. We offer information from the field, what we learn as we interact with leaders who are in pursuit of their own goal achievement. So here's what we will touch upon today. One, what are the big shifts that we see in business and in work? How do they manifest? What do the effective leaders do that others don't? What can you take away? Let's start this series with these, and then we go from there. Yeah. So Shwetal, the shifts that are happening in the broader context cannot be ignored. So what can we speak about the broader context that needs to be considered when we speak about the shifts? What's that background that we should be aware of?
There are multiple contexts that most of us are aware of already, but you're right, those do need to be looked at before we can speak about the shifts. I see the broader canvas across three contexts: the macro context, the professional context, and of course, the personal context. Let's start with the macro context. What has happened is, of course, of late, there has been a huge focus on environmental issues, climate changes. Many people have also committed to the cause of social justice and racial equity. There have also been increasing concerns about inclusive growth and seemingly a lot of disparity on the wealth front. And the pandemic has been a catalyst for putting the spotlight on some of these areas. Now, of course, the macro context, which is most important, is the pandemic itself, which has taken a toll on health, on stress, on economies, personal as well as industrial and governmental. So that's one context, the macro context. Then there's the professional context, which is complexity is high, disruption is very fast-paced, and all of us are working in a fairly complex system of multiple stakeholders. And every individual, irrespective of the industry they work in and irrespective of the role they play, have had this as their professional context. And the last one, which almost no individual in the world is untouched by, is the personal context. All of us have experienced stress over health and our own personal finances. There has been increased isolation because of working in a virtual or hybrid setup. Many of us have succumbed to a sedentary lifestyle as compared to pre-pandemic. There have been increased personal responsibilities, whether it's on the home front or the family front. And of course, there has been huge change in our daily routines and the life as we knew it. So this is the broader canvas on which we are going to speak about the shifts and how they are playing out. So Hari, what are the shifts in focus for today's conversation?
Yeah. So like you said, right, it is a complex canvas. Too many things are going on. Too many changes are there. And we can't speak about all of it, and really we cannot focus on all of it. So I want to take a leaf out of the famous quote of Jeff Bezos about focusing on matters that don't change instead of those that do. So what we know is that many changes are happening in the world of business, the world of work, in the world of workforce. Many were triggered by the crisis-like phase in the pandemic. Many of these changes might fade away. But many more of these changes are here to stay. They are going to be sticking around. I want to stay focused on what's not changing, or at least our opinion on what's not changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we speak about all of these shifts, while we may look at what has changed, but what's the reality of our context today is we need to also consider what will remain consistent and perhaps unchanging. So what is the first shift you're going to speak about?
So look, I think based on the work that we do with our clients, we observe significant shifts in the business. So let's start at that level, right? I'm seeing business transformation in different stages of maturity. Now, I use the word stages of maturity, but that doesn't mean a stage is better than the other. They're just simply different. Each business venture is making choices and really set themselves in a particular stage based on their context, their vision, and their aspiration. So again, I don't get caught up in thinking one stage is any form or fashion better than the other. Yeah, that said, stage one, thinking about adoption of digital technologies. For some companies, actually for many companies, this may look like stuff done and dusted, but not for many more out there. There are many old economy companies out there who have started thinking about very specific digital technology side. Like such a best example of that is the use of data and analytics, or simple, straightforward process automation. These kind of things are coming up, and that's really the stage one. Stage two is we are seeing digital transformation initiatives getting fast-tracked. Digital transformation initiatives, for lack of a simple definition, right? I think let's just talk about it as a big part of the business getting truly transformed by a digital approach, a digital technology, a digital mindset, whatever. So a good example could be some of our client organizations that have sat on the fence on supply chain automation have prioritized that as a 6-month project now. So it's one of those things that you're starting to see suddenly becoming very real. Digital transformation initiatives are in the mainstream. They're actually happening across the board. They are on the project plan everywhere. That's the big thing. Stage three, shifting from being tech-enabled to being tech-led. Now, this is a massive shift. You see some of the organizations in the entertainment sector, personal healthcare sector, making these shifts. Now, these are not easy shifts, but there are certain sectors where you're starting to see this happening more. Stage four, emergent sectors and categories. Now, this is the place wherein new business models themselves are emerging to create and deliver value. Now, by and large, this is happening in the startup ecosystem. You're seeing very disruptive players coming out, doing things completely from the scratch. Now, this is really the various stages of shifts that you're actually seeing. And even though I'm using the word digital, these shifts apply in the same way if we characterize them in the language of innovation.
Absolutely. And I notice a bunch of people have joined. And so, folks, thank you for making the time to listen into this conversation. You will see a question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen, or perhaps the top of your screen, and a chat option also. And so if you'd like to drop us questions, or you'd like to share your opinion on what resonates and perhaps even what doesn't, please drop us a message and I'll pick that up. But Hari, I'm going to seed the first question here, which is you're using words like digital and innovation, and you're speaking about adoption of technologies. Now, this has been around for a while. This is not something new. So, I'm curious to know what is different now from what existed earlier.
Great question. Two big things: speed, deadline. Or let's just stay on those two words. I think what is happening right now is the number of CXO conversations, board conversations that I've been in, wherein we have spoken about digital initiatives, we have spoken about transformation initiatives, are numerous prior to the pandemic. What is being very clearly seen differently in the last 500 days is conversations are not academic. Conversations are not theoretical anymore. Conversations are not about a futuristic initiative. There is a very clear mandate coming through in terms of execution. There's a very clear focus and emphasis on change and saying, okay, how do we actually go about this change? It's no longer about let's brainstorm on something. It's about, okay, what's the project plan for this? What's the program plan for this? Who are the stakeholders? So a deadline has been set for these changes. And that's really the big shift that I have seen in the last few quarters.
Absolutely. I think some of the leadership teams we work with are speaking about becoming tech first. And it's no longer in the future. The definition of the future has literally become the next 3 months and no longer 18 months. So how are you seeing these shifts impact the workplace and the workforce?
Yeah. So first of all, right, when I think about business and I think about work, I think of them as kind of two orthogonal vectors of shifts that are happening. Now, when we talk about the world of work, I think we have to think, at least I organize it in terms of two big categories of shifts. One, the new structure of work. There are certain pieces that are happening in the form of new structures that support remote only and hybrid models of work. New support structures that support fast strategic execution. For example, some of our client organizations are truly starting to think cross-functional agile execution. It's very easy to think about these structures of work when you're a startup, starting from scratch. But when you're a mature organization which has a business model, a certain organizational design, it becomes a much harder thing to do. And those are the one category that I see. The second category is new forms of work. Now, new forms of work are emerging fast and gaining traction for multiple reasons. First, for better commerce, gig models of work are emerging and getting institutionalized. Second, for better development and experience, employees are starting to think about much more versatile models of work, versatile forms of work. Can I work in two different organizations at the same time? Can I work in more than two at the same time? Third, new forms of work that have a focus on the employee welfare and employee wellness. These are all things that are emerging. What's interesting is the fact that all of these are emerging at the same time the business shifts are happening.
Absolutely. I think what has changed forever is that many people will never return to an office environment. They will consider only remote work opportunities. Others will come back to office, but with very changed expectations from their employers about prioritizing their well-being, offering flexibility, perhaps even shining the spotlight on social purposes and social causes that they care about. And organizations will continue to need to be inventive with how they encourage connectivity, are respectful of well-being and the purpose that their workforce brings to the organization, and how they can continue to nurture the organization culture that they want to take forward. And these expectations will extend to those who lead at all levels in the organization. Yeah. So I think increasingly we are part of conversations with our clients where it's true that in the post-COVID competitive landscape, the ability to turn to digital and the ability to attract and retain top-tier talent by building a conducive environment for them will be the factor that defines winners and losers. And winners will be those who understand how and why the pandemic has prioritized what matters most.
Absolutely. So let us now zoom in further. Based on the work you and your team do with leaders across the board, what are you seeing?
First thing we're seeing is the shift in the definition of who is this leader. So a leader is no longer only a C-suite leader or a designated senior manager. It is true in today's world that every member of an organization is part of a complex system of diverse stakeholders, all of whom are working towards interconnected, ambitious goals. And every stakeholder in this complex, diverse system needs to play a key role in achieving these ambitious goals. Therefore, any and every member of the system is a leader, whether it's a frontline staff or back-end staff or a subject matter expert or to a C-suite executive. Any person who chooses to step up and lead is a leader, and that's one big shift.
It's very interesting. The notion of organization as a network of professionals driven by purpose and by incentives is a view that I increasingly see CXOs express. Yeah. Organizations and their business ecosystem as an interconnected network. It is a part of our own worldview of leadership, and it's starting to really materialize in front of us. So, Shwetal, what's the shift in the expectation that organization has from these leaders?
Absolutely. I'm going to speak about 3 shifts. And these are shifts that we are hearing from the leaders we work with, but also some of the influencers and our partners across the world. The first shift is a key expectation to think big. And many companies even have this as a stated organization value. think big about envisaging a future state and designing for it. It is about creating value in the ecosystem that they operate in. It requires these leaders to step back from day-to-day execution to create possibilities. And what it requires them to do is evaluate trade-offs, take risks, take a radical approach to achieving aspirations. And why is Think Big so important right now? Because Think Big could result in growing a market or creating a product or finding new processes to make the customer experience better or creating loyalty for talent which exists in the organization. Perhaps even about creating a sustainable future for the organization through innovation. That's something we touched upon earlier. The key really is, how can a leader think big? It's a question we are asked very often. A leader can think big by probing assumptions, by questioning the boundaries and pushing those boundaries out, by thinking deeply. And this can only happen by stepping back from day-to-day execution, in which, unfortunately, leaders seem very seeped today. There is no other way to do this except to block calendar time. But Think Big is not just about the thinking. Think Big is also about creating energy and excitement. It's about inspiring people by communicating and reinforcing the organization's mission or the team mission. This needs to be done frequently, using simple language through multiple channels, and most importantly, tying into an outcome that people care about. Now, here is the dexterity that a leader will need to display. On one side, the leader will need to make bold decisions and pursue bold paths. But at the same time, it will also require the leader to stay humble and acknowledge that they may not have all the information that they need to make the choices that they're making. And therefore, leaders will need to keep a very open mind to continuously look to refine the vision, the strategy, or their view of the future. And I noticed there are a couple of comments in the chat window also, with Walter says studies in the UK have shown that 30% of the workforce is open to changing careers or employers if there's no flexible options post-pandemic. Absolutely, Walter. I think it's something we are also seeing here in India. There is such a huge shift to remote and hybrid work, which is what makes Think Big even more important, because irrespective of whether people are physically co-located and coming together, it is still required that they make these bold decisions while remain open to the possibility of refining these or changing these. So yes, leader is in that sense an influencer in their network. Hari, how are you seeing Think Big? Hari, you're speaking on mute.
Yeah. So I think I absolutely agree with everything you said. It's critical. Organizations were subtle about expectations around creating, delivering, monetizing value in the past. No longer are they subtle about it as far as leaders are concerned. Markets don't allow them to be subtle about it. So strategic thinking big is become critical. Dexterity and the ability of leaders to hold polarities is a key element that comes into play when you start to talk about thinking big. So fully agree. Let's move to the next big thing, Shwetal.
I see a couple of questions also, but we're going to take them as we finish these next 2 points. The second one is to lead networks. I mentioned earlier that we are members of an interconnected system, and each one of us today needs to collaborate across the network to generate value. This network includes internal members of the organization and also customers, partners, service providers. I've already spoken about how energizing and inspiring the network is a key for the leader, and this will continue to be critical. But a great leader will also need to have the ability to form coalitions and accrue support. In these, the leader will need to enthuse others to embrace change, co-own the transformation, negotiate with a range of stakeholders, overcome active resistance and dormant conflict. And as the talent pool becomes global, increasingly leaders will be part of very diverse networks. This leadership will be boundary spanning and will require efforts in relationship building. Most importantly, it will require empathy and a keen listening ability. The dexterity that will be required of the leader is to manage conflict, but also actively mine for conflict when seemingly there is none. Another dexterity will be to balance candor with empathy to ensure there is clarity, but also a sense of psychological safety. And leaders will need to make decisions very quickly with unfinished access to data and analysis, and they'll need to do this with confidence. And the last piece is, in this data-driven networked economy, leaders will also need to be seen as trustworthy and ethical. This will ensure that leaders in the network see them as network worthy, and building this kind of equity for themselves, their teams, and their organizations will be key to lead networks. What's your view, Hari?
Again, fully agree. Boundary spanning is critical. The behaviors associated with boundary spanning, skills associated with it have become even more critical. But the ability to constantly think less of boundaries and thinking of a network that extends endlessly is even more vital, especially for senior leaders. They have to be able to think of their business ecosystem almost as a network all the time, where the value is getting exchanged, where you are actually giving as much as taking. That's really a critical one. So again, what's the last big element, Shwetal?
The last one that I'm going to speak about is driving execution. Now, none of these can exist in isolation. Think Big will need to be supported by leading a network and driving execution. And driving execution is about creating scalable and sustainable high performance. This includes defining specific goals, making plans, ensuring their adoption, specifying roles, giving feedback, creating rituals which further performance. And it's also about allowing others to take ownership to achieve the goals which have been agreed upon. Now, this will again need the leader to be dexterous to further the goals on innovation through thoughtfully planned experiments, while also creating systems to scale results. And continue to execute when there is clarity, but also continue to execute when there is ambiguity by using levers which are firmly in one's control. So leaders will need to monitor dashboards regularly to analyze data, to seek inputs, and also co-opt the network into what can be controlled. What's here? So I want to say there is one more piece that I want to speak about, which is how personality preferences are assumed to play a role in thinking big, driving execution, and leading networks. But the truth is that leaders today will have to discard their personality preference, leverage strengths certainly, but also focus on building skills around think big, driving execution, and leading networks. Traditionally, we've seen leaders say, think big is my strength, and I'm going to delegate execution to somebody else. But in the rapid changes that leaders are experiencing today, while delegation is very much a reality, but leaders across levels will need to continue to focus on these three aspects. Hari, I noticed there's a question in the chat window. How are leaders managing the stress of doing it all? Can you answer that?
Sure, absolutely. So look, I think there's a lot of literature around managing stress, but I'm going to give you a very pragmatic response. The good leaders that I see who are managing it well always look for what's the source of stress in their personal context, because it's never the same. Even when the context is the same for two individual leaders, the source of stress can be very different. Taking good help to identify the source of stress and then managing it is the one critical thing that I see good leaders do. And they seem to be constantly doing it. They seem to be on top of things, even as the crisis has played out for them. So that's the big one that I at least have seen, source of stress.
Yeah, spot on. And folks, if you have other questions, please feel free to add it either to the chat window or the Q&A icon that you see on your screen. We are also, I notice, up on time, but we are happy to stick around and answer more questions. For those of you who may have to run, it's been a pleasure to have you at this conversation today. For others, happy to take a few more questions. And Hari, while we wait for questions, there is one more piece that I want to speak about, which is key leader attributes that have been in the spotlight of late. And some of these are attributes around resilience, candor, empathy, trust. And we've spoken about these. I especially want to speak about resilience because so much has been written about it. Resilience is a muscle. And because of the stress and the uncertainty that's existed during the pandemic, all of us have built this muscle in some way or the other, some more than the others. But as we recover and as we move into a post-pandemic phase, leaders will need to focus on ensuring that this muscle doesn't waste away. And there are ways, whether that's self-awareness or other tools that are used, to continue to strengthen this muscle to address the complexity and the uncertainties that lie ahead. There is another question, Hari, and let's see who can answer it amongst us. There are individuals who've not had these experiences of formal leadership. How can they become better leaders? Go ahead.
I'll take one shot. Yeah, I think, look, leaders are always developed in the direct experience, no matter whatever other things we do. Now, the question is, can we orchestrate enough direct experiences for yourself, right? So we don't need to go through formal leadership roles. We don't need to go through formal leadership roles to develop as a leader. Today, we live in an environment where there are enough opportunities at the enterprise and outside the enterprise to take on certain leadership roles, right? Either in a social setting, in a entrepreneurial setting, in a creative setting, and also in a formal within the enterprise formal work setting. So the opportunities we have are far more. I know of, for example, I know of a product manager who takes on a weekend responsibility as a leader in a social setting so that they can actually get the leadership experience. But they also use that experience in a very meaningful manner, prepare themselves for critical actions, reflect on that, so that they are absolutely developing the leadership attribute, even as they are playing a more of a, let's say, a professional role within their formal work. So there are always opportunities to actually develop yourself as a leader, especially in today's settings.
Yeah, absolutely. A bunch of other questions. One says, I've never met my team, which I have hired. How can I build a relationship with them in the absence of face-to-face interactions? I think, Vinita, there are a bunch of leaders out there who want to know the answer to this question, and I'm going to take a shot at responding to it. I have a set of what must not be done and what can be done. I have spoken to team members and leaders who find it extremely uncomfortable to set up a chat purely for informal purposes. So to call a team member in the middle of the day or in the evening purely to have an informal personal chat is something a lot of leaders and their team members find awkward and uncomfortable. Some even perceive this as intrusive because seemingly there's so much work to be done and there are family responsibilities. What we recommend is find a way to build in those conversations through one-on-ones. So schedule one-on-ones often. The purpose of that one-on-one, formal purpose, can be to reinforce the vision, can be to check in on the execution, can be to share certain views or opinions. But you can also have an informal agenda for that one-on-one, which is to check in on how the person is doing. Of course, without crossing boundaries, and people have different kind of boundaries that work for them. So to be very aware of what these boundaries are and not cross them, but to really build in that conversation around attempting to understand this individual's needs, aspirations, current priorities, the personal well-being, and inquiring about all of this can be built into formal interactions. It's impossible to have these kind of informal interactions during group settings or team meetings. It can be lighthearted, but it's very rare that a leader would get an insight into an individual's aspirations, needs, and context in a group setting. So the one-on-one setting is absolutely imperative, and to find a way to build these kind of conversations into the formal agenda of the one-on-one. Hari, there's another question, which is, where does organization culture fit in your narrative?
Culture, we see it as a composite shadow of the collective set of behaviors that occur already in the organization. So culture is always there. So I don't see the role of culture shifting significantly in the new narrative or in this changed set of circumstances that are happening out there. Leaders have always been and continues to need to be the custodian of culture that makes sense, that means the most for everyone, every member of the organization. So in that sense, the role of culture continues to be vital. It was vital. It continues to be vital. I don't think when we speak about all these shifts that are external, like a business and work and all that, it diminishes the role of culture. No, it does not. But one key thing I do believe is that culture also must adapt, because individuals and what they are looking for, what they're aspiring for is shifting. What is of meaning to individuals is shifting. And therefore, cultures must adapt to accommodate that meaning within the organization. That's really how I see it. Not easy, but leaders must remain the custodians of culture.
Thank you, folks, for joining us today, and thank you for your questions. We intend to do this as a series of conversations, and we hope that you will join us for future conversations. Have a good day and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.